am McKade Kleinknecht. I have been at STAR for about 3.5 years as an electrical engineer. I previously, before I was full-time, I was engineering intern here when I was at NDSU. So I've been at STAR for approximately about 4 years of experience. Over the years, Randy Schmidt and Christy Robinson have been my managers over the years who have kind of guided me throughout a lot of this process. A lot of the co-ops that I deal with are in southwestern part of the state of Minnesota. With that being said, I think it was April 10th, Winter Storm Wesley hit that area, and to this day yet, we are still kind of working on some of the FEMA projects that hit that area. So today we're kind of just going to talk about kind of some of the brief overview of FEMA and kind of go through kind of some of the steps that we have seen that makes the most sense in the future and to help kind of speed some things up. With Winter Storm Wisely, we have definitely learned a lot of lessons. One of those lessons is we kind of delayed a lot of our steps because of the fact that we weren't really sure how to properly do some of them. So we kept kind of waiting on answers before we actually proceeded some of these steps. So the big part of today's presentation is just kind of showcasing that you should continue to move along, even though that you maybe don't have your answer yet, or your questions answered or whatnot. We want to proceed as fast as possible. That'll help everything kind of move along here. So to get kind of started here today, we'll just jump right in. Okay, so what happens when the storm hits? Obviously, we'll be doing our basics and trying to get the lights back on. So the guys, the crews, maybe some neighboring co-ops are going to help out, get the poles back up and get power back to the customers. But some of the side steps that we should maybe be thinking about in the future on trying to get, when it comes time to FEMA, is documenting some things we maybe not normally document. One of those things is outages. A lot of co-ops will document this regardless, but we would track the number of outages per day. What we'll do with the number of outages is we kind of forecast, we show FEMA kind of a timeline of how many, when the storm was at its peak, and then kind of slowly on when people kind of got their power back on. It just kind of describes the picture to them a little bit easier. If you do have an outage management software, a lot of the reports can automatically do that for you, or you kind of play a playback feature to get that information for you. But if you do not have a software for that, I would definitely recommend tracking some of that. The next thing that we came to conclusion that we definitely should have made work orders by county. We learned that one of the first meetings that FEMA has with the utility is that they will have a utility, or they'll have a county meeting. So whatever county that your utility is in, your county will have a meeting for it. If you are a utility that is in multiple counties, you only have to attend one of those meetings, but they do prefer that you split up your estimated costs and your damages by county. The reason that they do that is each county does have to provide a report to the state and to FEMA on coming up with their cost estimates per county. And then depending on what that cost is, kind of factors into how much FEMA declares for total cost damage. Another huge thing is, and this one's pretty tough because the guys are out there more so concerned about trying to get the power back on to the customers, but take as many pictures as you can possible. They do tell the story, and we found that just having as many pictures as possible is definitely the way to go. One thing also to mention with the pictures is, if possible, if you can somehow geotag them, we found that to be the best in case FEMA does ask where this picture was located at. So somehow have just GPS coordinates attached to them. So that's kind of what to do, like when the storm hits and what to think about. The next step is going to be field inspection, and then the data gathering off that field inspection. We found that this is actually probably one of the most crucial parts of FEMA. If you get this part correct, everything after this will become a lot easier. So what this kind of entails is, after the storm hits and you kind of are somewhat back to full 100% power to all your customers, is we want to inspect your system that was damaged from this storm. What you'd want to do is, if you do have some form of a collector map, we're going to want to make some sort of collector app that's going to collect this data in a very neat way. As an FYI, STAR, since we did kind of have some problems with this in years past, STAR is in the process of making a FEMA specific collector map. We kind of found that we were maybe a little bit too complex in some of our data gathering methods that we used in previous. And we found that FEMA doesn't necessarily care about this like super small details. They just kind of want an overview of descriptions. So simpler descriptions are better. A lot of the people at FEMA that look at a lot of this stuff don't have much utility background, so they don't know what a lot of it is. So the simpler you can make it, the better. Another thing that we found to be a major miss in what we did in the past was, with that collector map, as we fix things, we're definitely going to want to keep that original database on the collector map up to date. So say you have a broken stud pole and you go back and you fix it in a month later, we're going to want to update that map to say that it's complete, that works complete on that particular point. And then also ask for help. A lot of the southwestern co-ops that previously had some storm damage with Winter Storm Wesley asked STAR for help, whether that was engineering help, GIS help, or our inspection crews help. A lot of our inspection crews actually assisted with the field assessment last storm. So they used the STAR collector map, or the co-op themselves had their own specific collector map. Either way, the STAR does have an inspection crew that can assist in getting that information on a collector map as fast as possible. Kind of below is an example of a map we have made in collector map before, but we are in process of updating this to kind of make things go smoother. So the next step, we hope, is going to be the FEMA Declaration. This may or may not be the next step, but we kind of hope it does happen. With that being said, the emergency declaration, it does take time to process and become officially signed declaration. I think Winter Storm Wesley the storm started on April 10th. And I don't think we had a signed FEMA declaration until like mid-June. So it did take a couple months. And but we were very confident that it was going to be a FEMA declaration. And some of the big mistakes that we made was we were waiting to proceed on some of our stuff until after the FEMA declaration was made. In future, we definitely recommend do not stop any work, do not stop any process, proceed, keep proceeding, even if there isn't a FEMA declaration yet. The reason why the FEMA declaration does take a while to process is the state does have to gather damages and costs per county to provide to FEMA. Once the state gets all that proper data, it does get sent to the president to get signed, and that process can just take a while. So depending on if the FEMA declaration is signed or not, if it isn't signed or not, then the next step would be evaluation of the line. So once we have all the data points gathered, the inspected data points gathered in Collector Map, we're going to want either an engineer or someone to evaluate what actually qualifies for a line rebuild or reconductored. FEMA does have specifications on what qualifies for this. And if it does qualify, the construction must be like for like, unless we go to an improved project, which we'll talk about. And we highly recommend that we do end-to-end segments for that qualifying line. So meaning we're not cutting into, splicing into existing line to get this part of a line rebuilt. We want it to be end-to-end, not creating additional splices. So with that evaluation of line, a PE must fill it out and sign the line inspection template. This worked out really well with FEMA. They saw that PE signature and they did trust it a lot more. So with this is an example of the evaluation form that the PE would fill out and do. It just kind of goes through the utility information and then the line section information, where it's at, where it's located. And then as you can see below, might be tough to see, but there is a list of criteria that needs to be met in order to qualify for the line. So what you end up doing is you kind of just filling out the Excel or the tables below and add up all the criteria. And if it passes the criteria met, then that line can qualify for a conductor replacement. And then a PE would sign off on it. Once we get those lines qualified and determined, we want to make staking sheets right away. So what the staking sheets will do will help us determine what materials we'll need and if we want to go out for contractor bids to get this line made or to get rebuilt or whatnot. The next step on this is we want to actually go out for bids right away. Even if it's not FEMA declared yet, but yet we're confident on it. The reason being is we waited a little too late with the last winter storm, and we waited probably till fall. Well, at that point, there wasn't much rebuilding going to happen. So we had to wait till 2020 to do a lot of our line rebuilds overhead to overhead. And then actually 2021 is when we're doing a lot of our hazard mitigation improved projects. And then with the bid process, FEMA does have a very, very extensive procurement that we must follow. That alone could be probably a half a day plus presentation. But some of the main points to note is you must have a minimum of 3 bids with any FEMA work that you're going to do. So that would include if you go out for contractor bids to build some of that line, you must do at least a minimum of 3 bids, and you must award the lowest bidder. That is not much way around that unless you have valid reasons not to. So for material, if the vendor didn't provide the right material that didn't meet your specs, that could be a way to avoid the lowest bidder, but anything else, you must take the lowest bidder. Also for materials, some store items do not need to be bid out specifically. Some of the bigger material needs to get bid out. And then we found out if you are part of a purchasing group, do some research on that. If it does qualify for FEMA's procurement process, we found at the time, the purchasing groups that some of our clients were part of did not seem to qualify for the FEMA procurement. So we had to rebid a lot of that stuff. So the next part, and what can be one of the most confusing parts, is the FEMA projects. So FEMA defines projects a little bit differently than what we might be used to. You list the damage. So you first define the damages in what's called Grants Portal. Grants Portal is a portal that is used to communicate information between your FEMA project manager and the utility itself. If you don't already have a Grants Portal, when it comes time to those beginning county meetings, when you assess your damage and costs, the county will help you set up a Grants Portal. So what you first want to do is you want a list of damages defined first. And then after that, you want to make your FEMA projects. So a FEMA project, all it is a group of work orders that fall into a common FEMA category. So what we end up doing is we group all like work orders. So the evaluation of the line will be its own FEMA project that falls under a different FEMA category. And we'll go through that here in a little bit. There are also different categories of projects which have different reimbursements for costs. This is a very important step as some categories and projects will get approved a lot faster than the other ones. And most projects, FEMA does want to be completed within 18 months of the FEMA declaration. But although the FEMA is very generous in allowing extensions to be made. Okay, so here's a kind of a list of what those projects looks like in Grants Portal. As you can see, when you're in and define your projects, there's a project number that's located right here. They're blocked out right now because this is different utilities Grants Portal. But this project number is pretty much how FEMA will communicate with you. So if they say a certain project number, this project number becomes very important, and they will not reference work orders, nothing like that. They will always use a project number and then the category that project falls under, which we'll go through here in a bit, and then just the title of that. So all this is, for example, right here where it says improved project, that is a FEMA project that has, for example, 10 work orders on it that the utility plans to improve the project on. So it's just a grouping of work orders get put into a project for FEMA. So one of the first groupings would be what's called emergency work. This is also known as category B when talking to FEMA. This includes all work that is being done during the storm to get the lights back on. So once all outages are 100% back online is the time frame of when this category B is used. It is recommended to get as much work done as possible in this time frame. This is one category that seems to pass FEMA a little bit quicker and faster, and you'll get your money faster. So it is recommended to get as much money or as much work done as possible in this time frame. The next one is the miscellaneous fixes. So this is just after the storm, after the outages have all been restored. These are just the individual work orders or blanket work orders that don't include reconductoring. So none of the lines that qualify for the reconductoring that we previously talked about. So examples of this would be replacing the stub poles, cross arms, hardware, leaning poles, more so just the kind of like the onesie twosie ones out there. Not sure if I'm supposed to, I don't even know how to get to that. Okay, so it'll just kind of include the onesie twosie projects out there. And the big thing to note when you're actually fixing a lot of these is if you are using a collector map, be sure to mark these locations complete in that collector map so we can actually progress on what we're actually doing this will become kind of essential when FEMA does some of their on-site inspections when we get to that. And then these are category F projects. So pretty much everything after category B kind of turns into a category F. So the next step, the next project would be your overhead to overhead projects. These are the projects that qualify with the PE evaluation form. These projects also fall under category F for FEMA, and these projects must be like for like. So if it's single phase, you must rebuild it single phase. If it's overhead, you must rebuild it overhead, and you must follow the same existing path. We highly recommend having a documented design criteria made for your construction work plan and or your policy. The reason we state that is, for example, if you have, we'll say 6 existing copper out on the line, if you don't have a design criteria that states you want to rebuild that line to a minimum of say 1 on ACSR, FEMA's like for like conductor for single phase is number 2 ACSR. So if you don't have some of this design criteria made, the like for like portion of what you're building might end up being like a number 2 ACSR, or you would have to qualify it under the improved projects, which we'll talk about here next. So an approved project is, so FEMA does allow with justification a utility to replace the damaged line with an above normal level of construction if it helps prevent another damaged event. So this would include for utilities going overhead would be stronger class poles, shorter span length, things like that. It is worth noting that FEMA does recognize that construction standards have changed. So that's why that design criteria that would be in your work plan or policy is pretty critical, because that you can show them that you have documented proof that this is what our today's standards are, and this is what the minimum that we install these projects are. It will make your life a lot easier. And then also improved projects can also potentially include the rebuilding of the line to underground. This we'll talk about here more towards the end of our slides. And with any improved project, a cost benefit analysis is most likely going to be needed, just for FEMA's records on proving why this is going to need this needs to be improved. So the next topic is going to be the FEMA site inspection. We learned that with FEMA site inspectors, they varied a lot. Depending who the site inspector you had. Some had utility background and some did not have utility background. So some of that can vary. So some of the biggest recommendations we would make is try to have a lot of your data damages prepared for the FEMA site inspector. So what some of that will include is all your damaged points, and then what has already been completed. And then also what you're going to want to do is separate those points per project. So for why that becomes important is for the emergency and the miscellaneous projects, all they do is they inspect a sample of those. They don't actually go out to every single site. They will actually just see a certain percentage sample, and they'll go out and take pictures and GPS points, and then for documentation for themselves. So we found that if you provide that data up front, they will give you a list of what percentage points they want to see, and then it'll be up to the co-op to kind of provide a map or whatnot, or assist in letting them know where these points are at. And then the co-op and the FEMA site inspector will go out and kind of inspect some of these lines. For the like for like and the improved projects, so the projects that qualify for reconductoring, they will probably want to inspect each site-specific area that qualified. What they're doing there is a lot of times they're also getting pictures and verifying that there is or was damage there. And what they're going to do is also get start and end GPS points, and then a lot of pictures. They use this information on determining the damages assessment. They'll use that information, and then they will also provide them, which is the next step, a damage descriptions and dimensions form to FEMA. Okay, so with FEMA Site Inspector, they'll get their own kind of damage list made, and then also the co-op will also want to provide a summary of the damage descriptions and dimensions for each FEMA project to FEMA, the FEMA project manager, and then FEMA themselves will write up the official version. So what that summary of the DDD kind of includes is the damaged pole size and class, the damaged conductor size and length, and then the cross arm and then insulator. And then we did separate it by type as well. What they do is they will take this DDD and write up an official version. And what they end up doing is they have their own costs associated to these damages. So they have their own way of determining a cost calculator type thing. We have found that their costs are a little bit higher than what we might anticipate. And we believe that the reason that is because they're taking an average cost per damage, kind of based off like the Midwest. So replacing a damaged pole might be more in a city compared to rural. So we believe they take an average of that, which will indicate that when you get your DDD official version back, it might be higher than what you anticipated. Okay, here. Okay. And then one of the last topics that we'll go through is the improved project. This is a project, in this particular instance, would include anything that we're upgrading that's not in our design criteria for overhead. And then it'll also more than likely include anything that we go overhead to underground. So what we want to do on getting the information that we'll need for getting this process going is doing a BCA calculation. So FEMA does have a BCA calculator on their website, I believe. And what that calculation analysis is doing is it's pretty much taking all the line that needs to be replaced, and then it'll compare to number of customers that it'll relate to being concerned to, and then it'll kind of give you a rating of if it's worth improving that project or not. We found that if you do it per work order, you probably won't get the 1.0 that's needed to be able to qualify for an improved project. So we found out that since FEMA groups everything in projects, groups the work orders into projects anyway, we took that entire improved project and kind of just put it into one entire BCA calculation. With doing that, we found that you'll get a lot higher of a BCA number. More than likely it'll be above 1.0. If it's not above 1.0, that's an indicator right away that this project will not be able to go underground, and that you'll probably just want to replace it overhead to overhead. So the like for like situation. We also need to pass the FEMA site inspection. We need to pass the FEMA site inspection for all projects to be able to get approved money, but particularly with the improved project, that becomes even more important. And then the improved project also needs a separate DDD. So all the damage descriptions that we would do with the poles, the conductor, the insulators and cross arms, we also need to separate those from the other qualifying like-for-like projects into its own. And then this is something that we helped FEMA gather some information on the environmental review. But since we're going overhead to underground, an environmental review does need to be done. And FEMA does require that FEMA does the environmental review for these projects. STAR did end up making some information templates type things on the environmental review and sent them to FEMA. It is unknown if they use that information or not. We just figured it might help them process things a little bit faster. And then also for an approved project, you need a scope of work. So what that scope of work is going to entail is kind of an introduction of why these projects need to be improved, some of the past history damages that have taken place. So for example, if you had previous ice storms on your system, they definitely want that list of previous ice storms to show that another ice storm in the future is indeed very likely. So in order to prevent that, a way to do that is going underground. And then with that scope of work too, we do provide our cost estimates of the work and some of the finer details on maybe why this area is more prone to ice than other areas. And then with the improved project, we want to make sure we do not, in previous projects, we kept saying definitely proceed, even though maybe we're not at the next step yet, but proceed as fast as possible. With the improved project, we do not want to start these improved projects without FEMA approval. The approval process does take a long time because the state has to look at it, and also the FEMA, the federal, also has to look at it. So with that, so many people looking at it, it does take a while, and it takes a while to gather all these documents. Just don't start building anything until we have, or even going after for quotes on these for bids and stuff, until we have FEMA approval, which took about 1.5 years for our last storm to get that approval. And then after that, that is about all I had. We kind of quickly went through some of that stuff. So is there any questions out there? And Christy Robinson is on the line too, so if there's any questions for her too.
Thanks, McKade.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there is any questions, feel free to give me an email, Christy Robinson an email, anyone an email here. We will probably reach out to some of the co-ops that STAR deals with on working with them on making a FEMA collector type map for the co-ops. We have learned that consistency between co-ops helps FEMA process things a lot easier. So one of the big problems we had is one co-op was doing it this way, so FEMA wanted it this way, but then the neighboring co-op did it a different way. So one of the big things is definitely consistency between co-ops definitely helps the FEMA project manager. So with that, the collector map, I think, is the #1 thing that we'll try to distribute to some of our co-ops. Jim, are you able to see the chat? There we are.
Okay, there are 4 here from Christy starting in 1106. So I don't know if you've seen those.
Oh, I have not.
In the chat. So I could repeat those.
Okay, I'll kind of go through the chat here. and just kind of go through what everyone is saying here. So Christy indicated that if your phone has location services on, the geotag will be attached to the picture. Yes, this is a highly recommended thing to do. If you are taking as many pictures as possible during the storm, definitely have that on so that we can put those images into a map even, so that we know where these pictures were taken. And then Christy also indicated the more projects that are completed and closed when at the FEMA process, the less paperwork FEMA will require from the cooperative. That's also a very good point. And then FEMA sometimes will choose to move emergency work done in the initial restore into category F. This may happen if a lot of the repair to final condition is performed in the initial days. Okay, and then Susan, has anyone been successful with overhead to underground conversion during storm recovery, especially considering the timeline needed for the environmental review? So Susan, I think right now with Winter Storm Wesley, we are currently being successful. It took 1.5 years to get some of that stuff hashed out. But right now it sounds like some of the co-ops in southern Minnesota have gotten a successful approval from FEMA to start redoing those lines underground.
So this is Christy, and I'll add to it. Part of the way to get undergrounding funds from FEMA is it's usually a partnership between 2 different buckets of FEMA money. Hence the reason why sometimes it takes a long time. The projects that do go underground are usually damaged line that can still stand or at least be temporarily repaired during the time it takes to get FEMA approval. So if you have a line on the ground and it needs to be at least put back up in the air, we have not seen a successful case of just putting the plow on the ground and going. Now, we're not saying that probably couldn't be done. It's just that wasn't the case with the Winter Storm Wesley, where instead what happened is the cooperative spot fixed different areas of that line. That line still qualified for total reconductoring, and the utility then put it in as an improved project requesting to rebuild the line underground. So FEMA funds paid for a portion of going like for like, and then it's called 406 hazard mitigation funds from the state actually paid for pretty much the rest. So then the line can go underground. Because of the 2-tier approach, approval takes a lot longer. And then if you have a bunch of these type of lines that you're putting in one project and you're getting over $1 million, there's also a committee that has to do a large project review, which also adds another layer of approval, which takes time to get to.
Thanks, Christy. Is there any other questions?
This is Tim Brolick with Benco Electric. Regarding that question of going underground for emergency restoration type stuff, we did do one once during a summer storm. This wasn't Wesley, but we had some straight line winds and some tornado activity, and all of our crews were busy, so we called an emergency locate and staked out an underground tap and did it that way in order to get them power that day. And they didn't need power at the time, you know, immediately because they had a lot of damage. So, and that went through the state in mitigation and just fine, whatever, at the state level, but that's a little different. So I don't know, just trying to throw that out there, but.
Yes, I know that is a different level. And I think, Christy, did you want to talk about that level or?
Sure. So the state has emergency funds for repair that are totally separate from FEMA. So the state legislation has set aside this emergency bucket when there is an event that maybe is not as catastrophic to lead to a FEMA declaration. So Tim, on your case, I'm not sure if that happened. Really what FEMA's worried about is they're worried that people are putting an underground line and they're spending significantly more dollars to repair than you would if you went back overhead. Now, what's nice about the rural areas of Minnesota, because we're normally not boring the entire project nor putting it in conduit, the cost to install underground is not that much more significant than rebuilding overhead. So a lot of the justification that we've done with FEMA is, even though their cost estimates say that there's a 25% difference, we're able to show in most cases there's only like a 10 or a 15% difference. And that's where that benefit cost analysis comes in, where if you can show that there's been a historical occurrence of storms that affects that line or affects that area, you usually can pretty easily get that calculation over 1. And that drives the narrative on why it makes sense to put a line underground.
And then Michelle pointed out that they had existing competitively bid contracts in place for non-site specific work. And we were able to use those contracts for Cat F work instead of going out for separate bids on the Cat F work.
So the only thing I'll mention, because Michelle is lucky, her FEMA office is not out of Chicago. And so we've noticed that FEMA offices do treat the process differently. And if we're not dealing with the Chicago office, we seem to have a quicker resolution to a lot of our FEMA claims. Okay,
then I think that will conclude this presentation. I appreciate everyone for stopping in for this presentation. I know there's a lot of questions when it comes to FEMA, so feel free to reach out to anyone here at STAR and we can assist you in that process in the future.